Hello everyone, it's me. I'm Julie McDowell and I'm going to show you in this video today how to do stenciling. Just straightforward stenciling. I've had lots of messages from people asking me to do this, and I know lots of you are struggling with this, and I did too when I first started. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips that will hopefully help you and take all your problems away. So my number one tip is that you have to have a good brush. I have tried a lot of brushes, and I have a lot of brushes, and the one I like to use most is by the Royal Design Studio. That's a stencil company. There are lots of good brushes out there, but I discovered this and they work for me, and so I stopped looking. Now the reason this works is because these brushes retain their shape. Even after I've pounded them to death, they go back to their original shape when they're dry. After I've washed them and dried them, they go back. They're very compact, they're stuffed full of bristles, and they stay upright. With the cheaper brushes that you can get in the craft stores, and I've tried them, they're great at first, but when you use them, there aren't many bristles in them to start, and then they start to splay out, and that causes lots of problems with stenciling, because one of the main things you don't want to happen is for paint to seep underneath the stencil. So number one tip is get a good brush. Okay, you only need one. You don't need a fancy big fat one, or this is a 1/2 inch one, and I pretty much use this for everything, to be honest. If I'm doing a large stencil with large cutouts, I will actually use a roller as well, a foam roller, little kind of 2-inch, 3-inch rollers that you can get now, and they work well too. But for this kind of stenciling that I'm going to show you today, this is the brush that I'm going to use, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay, so we have our brush, and now I'm going to talk to you about the paints. You can use any paint that you like. You can use the paint that you're using to paint your furniture with, or your decor, or whatever it is that you're going to decorate. Perfectly fine. You can also use artist acrylic paint, and I really like to use this more than anything because it has quite a different consistency. It's quite thick to start with, and that helps. Obviously, the more liquid the paint, the harder it is to control. So I do use this a lot. This is from my local craft store, and it comes in a variety of colours and lots of metallics, and they're excellent. So here we have, I've got 3 paints on the palette, so I'm going to show you. So I've just loaded my brush now with that blue paint, but the first thing you have to do is offload your brush. Absolutely, it's pretty much like dry brushing. So less is what we're looking for, absolutely less. Okay, so there are 2 methods for stenciling, and this has got a very, very tiny cutout. And this is a stencil, as you can tell. I use this a lot, one of my favourite ones. So one method is to swirl around like that. Okay, and that makes for a very clean finish. And when you're doing stenciling and you see all these extra squiggles on the sides, you have to do them too. Okay, and I will explain why in a moment. And it took me a while to actually work out what they were, but they're actually there to help you. Okay, so that's one way of stenciling. The other way to apply the paint is to dab it like that. And you probably have more success with that when you're starting out, because it's an up and down motion, whereas the swirling could creep underneath the stencil. But with the dabbing method like that, it's called pouncing actually, is the technical term. Pouncing is another way you can do it too. And of course the third way is with a roller. So that's what you do, and that's keep going, keep going. I'd already done that, so I'm pretty much have done 3/4 of this stencil. So I'm going to take off the stencil now and show you what it looks like. So there we are, perfectly done. Now where I swirled it, you can see it was much more filled in. And that's great, so that's done. Where I pounced it, because I've taken off a lot of the paint, you might want to go back over. So if it's not as thick or as defined as you want it to be, you just, when it's dry, and it won't take long, lay the stencil back down over it, really making sure you match it up, and go back, offload the paint, and do some more. And that will intensify the colour. Okay, now these little squiggles on the side are very important. They're called registration marks. And you'll see on this stencil here, they're all the way around. And they're quite strange when you look at them. Not all stencils have them, but this is called an all-over stencil. And this is by the Royal Design Studio as well. And it's called an all-over stencil. So it means that when you finished, I could cover this whole sheet of paper with this stencil and it would just like one continuous pattern. So what you do is when you've finished stenciling, you line up the registration marks. Okay, so that is what it looked like before. And if you look here, there's a mark that goes like that. So you try and find a mark that looks the same. And there it is on the other side. And you will see that all the other, see there's a little squiggle there, okay? And that's actually there, in that pattern there. So it means that when I carry on now, offload, you get one continuous pattern, and they have them on the four sides, so you can go in all four directions. So you see, that's completely carried on the pattern there, and so it goes on. So I'll show you what the other paint is like, which is a chalk type paint. I'm just going to clean off my brush a little bit. Okay, bring this into view. So here we are, this is a chalky paint, and I'm going to offload. Now this is much more liquidy, I can tell, and actually what I often do is I use the paper towel as my palette, that way you don't waste paint. So I can carry on with this, so I'll try and line it up again. Here we are, and using the swirling method. Okay, and it still works fine. It's a little bit, I could have used a little bit less. Now let me show you what happens if you put too much on. See? That's what happens, and I think that's what's happening to most people. Okay, can you see there? It's completely splodged through. It's gone right underneath the stencil. There's no clean lines, and that's what is very upsetting. But you know what? It's only paint. So if that does happen to you, wait till it dries, sand it down a little bit, just lightly, because it is creating another layer on your surface. Sand it down a little bit, paint over it again, and then start again. Okay, so another tip that I have too is to stick the stencil down, and I'm sure most of you know that anyway. You can use masking tape, or you can use the spray that you can get. It's kind of repositional spray. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, you can get them in the craft stores or in the art stores, and you just spray the back of the stencil and stick it down on your surface, and that makes a completely sealed contact, because that's the other problem that I think people have. They don't press the stencil down to the surface. Now, I very rarely use tape, and I never use spray, but I know a lot of people do, And the spray, I think, can actually harm it reduces the life of the stencils apparently, ultimately. But what I like to do is, as I'm going, is press down. I'm using my other hand all the time as I'm working around and pressing down, pressing the stencil down. So this is another really pretty little stencil. This is from Designer Stencils, and it's really pretty, and it comes with, on one sheet you get that corner pattern, you get this, you get that in 2 halves, and that, which I think is lovely, that would be a really nice stencil to put in between handles, hardware on a drawer. That's really pretty. So I'll try and put all the links somewhere on the video so that you know where to find these things. But what I'm doing here is I'm pressing down as I go, okay? And that too is really, really important. Now here, because there's some little dots cut out here, so when I do the swirling thing, it's not actually filling them all in. And also, when there's very, very fine lines, sometimes you do need to do the pouncing and the swirling. It gets very technical. So there you are. Let's have a look at this. Take the tape off and hope that this demonstration has not let me down. And there you go. That's nice. That's a really nice pattern. So there you are. It really is as simple as that. Quick recap. Brush. Find a good brush. Most important, don't buy the cheap ones. It's absolute false economy, and you'll just get so frustrated and you'll end up throwing them across the room and then out, and you'll give up. And I don't want you to give up, because you can do this. It's really, really easy. So find a brush that you like, that retains its shape. Stencils. Any stencils will work. Literally any stencil will work. These are 10mm Mylar. 5mm work as well. Now, obviously, the cheaper the stencil, the thinner it usually is. But they work. They all work. If you're using a very thin stencil, though, make sure you offload the paint. But that's critical anyway, whether you're using a thinner or a thicker stencil. So just for paint, use any stencil. They all work. Paint. Any paint will work. Showed you chalk style paint, a little bit watery. Have to really work that to take the moisture out. Artist acrylic paint from the craft store. The cheapest brand. You don't need to buy expensive brands. They're the best, actually. They really are the best because of the viscosity of them. They're nice and thick to start with. So that's good. And finally, stick the stencil down. Either use tape or the spray, or use your other hand as you go along and really, really press it down. Don't just lay the stencil down and paint over it, because that doesn't work. You can't do that. You've got to make sure there's no gap, or as little gap as possible, between the stencil and the surface that you're putting it onto. So that's it. I really hope it works for you. Let me know how it goes. Show me what you managed to do. And that is Stenciling 101 with Julie McDowell. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.